All right, so we're continuing our discussion of climate change, the climate emergency. People are sort of lobbying for it to be called a climate emergency because it is, instead of just the more benign sounding climate change. And there's a lot of stuff to synthesize to understand what things are like currently, how that's different from the past, and how things are going to continue to change and in some cases accelerate. So if you think back to class a week ago, last Wednesday we were talking about tipping points and how there's anywhere from 15 to about 25 of those, maybe 19 sort of super obvious ones, and around half of those, 9 or 10 of those have already sort of tipped over into tipped status, and are reinforcing the others to do the same faster and harder. So, can anybody remember what any of those tipping points were, just to kind of get our conversation going for today? We talked about a couple different ones, but something that runs like a positive feedback cycle or a self-reinforcing loop in terms of kind of planetary scale climate, global climate. Anybody? What are any of the tipping points we talked about a week ago? I know it was a week ago, so it's hard to recall, but take a look back at your notes.
Like the ice sheets melting?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's see. All right, so I don't know if you can see this with the glare, but this is actual satellite imagery. This is not an artist's impression. You've probably seen this before. This is making the round in the news out of NASA. So this is the annual cycle. And this is looping, so it's showing 1 year worth of imagery. The idea being that as the North Pole tilts away, the ice sheet grows aggressively over the Arctic Ocean, and then as the pole tilts towards the sun, it gets a lot more insolation, or watts per square meter, and a bunch of that melts back into seawater. And the change, or the emergency, or the destabilization part of it comes in where it doesn't quite grow as wide in the winter as it used to, and it in particular doesn't grow as thickly as it used to. So it's a real thin, shallow ice sheet with warm water melting it from the underside and extra sunlight trapped by greenhouse gases warming it from the top side. Okay, so that retreating ice, on average, makes it easier for that AMOC, the AMOC Atlantic circulation current, to slow down as that water that got locked up as ice in the past dumps into that current and disrupts its flow and slows it down. Again, since about 1950, that's slowed down about 15% in the last 70 years. Okay, so all these tipping points kind of touch each other directly or indirectly and make things flow in a different way or at a different rate. So, what we want to talk about today is where do we extend out of that knowledge of how things are going, our good and getting more detailed understanding all the time of how things are going to be going in terms of climate dynamics, and then kind of drilling down into site-specific or park-specific level weather patterns. What are those dynamics? How is that going to change? So, for example, ticks. We all know and love ticks. As things warm up, tick habitat has been spreading and expanding out of the southeastern United States northward and westward at a fairly aggressive clip over the last couple of decades. As warming increases, it means that we get fewer hard freezes that tend to kill off overwintering ticks and keep them in check. Also, we have people traveling a lot more than in previous centuries, a lot faster, a lot farther, right? And bringing things like ticks, in some cases, to places where they didn't used to could be before, and then pair that with a changing climate, and tick habitat has jumped that much in that trip. Okay? So, think about the effect of ticks at your park. Does your park currently have tick problem. So in certain places, ticks can actually, if they're bad enough, they can kill large ungulate calves like moose calves and elk calves by exsanguination. They remove so much blood from the animal that the animal dies. It's like Dracula Dead and Loving It, but against wildlife. Or What We Do in the Shadows, but with wildlife. Okay? If you're a Taika Waititi fan. So, think about the changed and expanded ranges of pathogens relative to the wildlife species in your parks. And this is pathogenic animals, it's pathogenic bacteria and viruses and protozoans, like more advanced bacteria that are a little bit more resistant to environmental or human kill-off. And pretty much all the other lower order life forms that we generally don't want to have to think about, like killer fungi. If you're a gamer and you like The Last of Us or The Last of Us 2, you know about cordyceps fungi that can, in real life, in specific species of ants, basically take over the ant's higher order motor function and basically march ants that they've infested to specific spots at the top of blades of grass, leaves and twigs and stuff like that, where they're more easily predated by ant predators. And then the fungi gets to spread through the predator and so forth a little bit better. Well, you could think about lots of different kinds of fungi spreading from more tropical areas into places that are a little bit or a lot warmer these days, where they have not been in human experience, for the last couple of 100,000 years, most of which was spent as hunter-gatherers, okay? Through the last ice ages and stuff like that. So, think about your park. Think about your wildlife species. Think about expanded ranges of parasitic or predatory or generally not symbiotic, commensalist, helpful interactions between things coming up largely from tropical areas into subtropical areas like most of the continental United States, into subarctic up in Alaska and so forth, where they couldn't have been before. So, one that we also want to think about for the human wildlife species at your park is mosquitoes. So mosquitoes kill more humans than pretty much anything else. Like Shark Week is exciting on TV. Sharks kill like 10 people a year, something like that on average. Like, you're not likely to get mauled and eaten by a shark. Although if one does get your arm and you're like a young surfer and you can sell the movie rights, it makes for a good story. But it's a good story because it's so rare and unexpected. Dying from Zika or any of the other host of mosquito-vectored human diseases, not real sexy and super common, so we don't really make movies about it. Because it's just like, well, somebody died of old age, so okay, I hope they had a good run. Not a particularly good movie. Let's see if we can pull up that number here. Yeah, so sharks, 10 people a year. Mosquitoes, about 1 million people a year. Across the wider context. Snakes, about 50,000. Snakes, kind of exciting. We occasionally get masterpiece movies like Anaconda. Humans kill more humans than snakes do by a factor of almost 10. So about 500,000 humans are killed by humans. And about 1 million people a year are killed by mosquitoes. So if you really think about it, if you want to have a war on crime, kill a lot of mosquitoes. And that's a difficult thing to do because they are kind of everywhere and so forth. But what I'm getting at here is that our human sense of risk evaluation, the widespreadness of a threat to humans, and the severity of a threat to humans, we're generally pretty bad at understanding and evaluating that and contextualizing it for our own recreation trip or to our own park, unless we do some quantitative work, some math work on figuring out what's the actual risk of dying at Rocky Mountain National Park from a lightning strike versus from a tick-borne or mosquito-borne illness at Rocky Mountain National Park. And if somebody dies from a lightning strike, it's going to make the news. It's not going to make the news if somebody dies from complications of Lyme disease or Rocky Mountain spotted fever or Ehrlichia or any of the other tick-borne illnesses or mosquito-vectored stuff, chikungunya called bone-breaking fever, or malaria and so forth, right? As warm temperatures move sort of up the latitude chain from places like Florida, all of a sudden, things that we occasionally had to worry about in places like Brazil, like Zika, start showing up in Florida. And people aren't used to that, so it becomes a new and fresh kind of problem because we're not used to it, we're not thinking about it, we're not prepared for it, and it becomes part of your job as running a park kind of a person, a ranger, park planner, park superintendent, the whole staff. Part of your job becomes just educating people about, hey, things now and in the future are not like the family trips you had here in the past. We now have disease X, Y, and Z present here. So when you go to the Grand Canyon, for example, there are big signs saying do not touch, do not approach, do not feed the wildlife. Because every year people are feeding the wildlife, and those ground squirrels, not particularly dangerous. The fleas on those ground squirrels that jump off of the ground squirrel onto your leg as you've got the ground squirrel sitting here and you're feeding it Fritos or Funyuns or any of the million synthetic flavors of Doritos, as those ticks are jumping off, they're carrying diseases to you. These are called zoonoses or zoonotic diseases. So, Black Plague. Right? Like the thing that killed 50% of Europe back in the day. Like actual 50% of people wiped out by Black Plague over time. You can get that at the Grand Canyon. Now, it's not a huge problem because we have things like modern antibiotics that takes care of the Black Plague bacterium decisively. But what's the problem when you have incomplete coverage across antibiotics and things like vaccines? What happens with the bacterium or the virus that is trying to overcome? Mutations, resistance, jumping, okay? It's like the Delta variant of COVID, right? Anywhere from 300 to 1,000 times more viral load. So, like viral particles getting breathed out by somebody with the Delta variant versus the reference variant that burned its way through most of last year. And it's the dominant strain now because it's really, really good. It's better at spreading. It's hopefully a little bit less deadly, but yeah, a lot of people can get it. Okay? So, the big issue with climate that a lot of parks are facing in terms of the management is twofold. One is the direct effects of changing climate, destabilized climate on your resources. A couple of years ago when we were at the Grand Canyon for summer camp, there was a polar vortex. So a huge, planetarily visible from space mass of very, very cold air burped southward as far as the Grand Canyon, which isn't that far from Mexico. And more recently, we had a polar vortex over Texas, right? We didn't get as many of those, as big, as often as we do now. So folks who grew up going to the Grand Canyon, your grandparents, the baby boomer generation, they don't think about getting 12 inches of snow, 15 inches of snow at the Grand Canyon in May and June. and they're not prepared for it, and it causes problems. In Texas, we saw several people died from busted pipes, super cold conditions. The power went out for a lot of people for a long time, and if you're on electric heat, you could freeze to death in that situation. In Texas, their power grid wasn't built for, ice storms in May and June, and so it was not ready for that. So there's the direct sort of impingement, the damage that happens to resources with a function of a new climate, one that we've never seen before in human experience. And then there's also the sort of paired issue with that of helping your visitors understand, hey, things are different now. This is kind of how they're different, and this is what you maybe need to adjust your plans for that you weren't necessarily planning to adjust before you arrived. All right, so we don't have a lot of hot and dry parks among our portfolio for this semester, but with the maybe 4 degrees Celsius change that we are on track for at the moment, with kind of our business as usual or maximum emissions scenario behavior right now as a species, including all of our industry and our agriculture, our livestock, our transportation and shipping, our 2-day prime shipping, all of that stuff is putting fossil fuels into the air. Our fossil fuel-based fertilizers, putting all of our food on the table, or almost all of our food on the table right now. What is your park looking at in terms of changes? And what does that translate to in terms of helping your visitors understand what new conditions or dangers or risks, and how risky are they relative to how things are now? Okay? So last Wednesday, remember we talked a little bit about what's kind of the shift in conditions, weather-wise, at your park, climate-wise at your park, based on application of forecasting and modeling on that map. So most places were anywhere from 5 to 15 degrees hotter, and anywhere from 50% less to 50% more, or close to 100% more in a couple cases, more precipitation. So what does that look like in terms of changes for your most typical visitor? Our assignment for last week was to try and get a sense of, okay, so let me take those numbers, think about them for a second, kind of run some mental scenarios in my head, some mental models of a hiker arrives at the Olympics, and based on this change in weather patterns, how's their trip likely to be different than what they expected? Okay, so we're going to spend some time today kind of picking that apart, and I got some more graphics and animations and maps and stuff like that I'm happy to kind of share around and post access to online, so you can get a sense of some of these things. But our first move is to get together with your group and talk through the pairing of last week's understanding of how our conditions going to be a little bit different at our park, and then moving that forward into what does that look like for any of our most typical visitors arriving to U.S. Virgin Islands off of the ferry, or stepping off of the plane and getting an Uber to the Olympics and going backpacking. Are they going to have to plan to encounter more rain, more intense rain? Are they going to have to plan to search a little bit harder for water sources that used to be there, that used to be normal, and now they're just gone because the precip pattern has dropped maybe, and the water table has dropped maybe around your park, according to that forecast? Okay, so get together with your group, take a moment to kind of look back through, okay, so what was Park saying about my particular chosen protected area in terms of weather changes by the year 2080, according to our current trajectory? What would that look like for a visitor to our park based on what we know about our visitors most commonly arriving for and doing. Okay, so group up and let's chat for a couple minutes about that. So run through a couple of scenarios, kind of play with it a little bit. The reason that we have to do this is, A, for the obvious, we need to do a great job of protecting people's safety and protecting the resources in light of changing climate and availability of moisture and survivable temperature profiles. And because the human wildlife is getting marketed to. Here's an image of Newsweek magazine. This is a national publication that says 100 places to explore before they disappear. Okay? So, airplanes have a pretty intense climate-forcing set of emissions. We burn a lot of energy to slingshot people around the globe in airplanes. So imagine a scenario where your visitors are flying to, let's say, Glacier National Park. And the fact of their travel is helping to cause the disappearance of the glaciers at Glacier National Park from irrecoverable melting, or any of the gazillion glaciers in Greenland or Scandinavia across the way, and so forth. Because they read an article like this, and there are many of them, that said, hey, this place is going away, so let's go catch it. Because, you know, if nobody else gets to, at least we should, right? So there's a moral and an ethical component to this as well. Advertising. It's a thing. Persuasive communication. Here we go. All right. Talk through your park. Try and get some kind of a basic sense of our most typical users. How might their trip look different in 2080? One useful technique in trying to figure out what the lived experience of your visitors is going to be like around the end of your careers is to think, what's way up airshed from us at our park? What could possibly go wrong with them that could blow over onto us? Or what's up watershed or up ocean current in the case of an island park? All right, so these are a bunch of ruined vista photos in New England from Western Canadian wildfires. So somebody in Boston is having a bad day because folks in the westernmost part of Canada are having a really bad day. We're all connected. We're all hooked to the same air tank, if you want to think of it that way. Okay? Here's an animated thermograph. If your park is north of Mexico, this is what a polar vortex looks like.
Polar vortex?
Watch how far south it dips. Is it not? Let me set this on looping here. All right, so this is an animated thermograph of a polar vortex. As the jet stream weakens and shifts away from the North Pole down towards us, down towards Greenland, it's easier and more common for it to leak huge, like continent-size blobs of frigid, like super cooled air. And we get stuff like those crazy snowstorms in Texas and at the Grand Canyon, which is super hot. So at the bottommost, it's halfway down Florida. That's right at the tropics line, where it's not supposed to freeze at all, period, whatsoever. If you can see kind of the outline of the continents there.
That's wild.
Yeah. Welcome to the future. All right.
This is the polar vortex?
Yeah.
It looks so cool.
So darker red is colder. And look how far south the red gets.
Just spirals around?
Yep, down into northern Mexico and about halfway down Florida.
So it's weird. Things are warming and cooling. It's like...
Yeah, so the warm air gets forced up into the Arctic and penetrates the protective barrier of the jet stream, and that forces these burps of super cold air out and southward towards the equator. So things warm up like...
See it like at the bottom where like the light yellow will like come up and like push it down.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
normally it would have stayed up there.
Right. So we get a little bit of cold weather closer to the equator, but at moments it's been 70 degrees hotter than normal up above the Arctic Circle as that hot air comes up and forces that cold air down. 70 degrees hotter.
Because like our island says it's going to be a lot of more heavier storms, but then also extreme drought. So it was like, how does that
Bigger swings, yeah. Bigger swings. We'll talk about how that works. So here you go. The goal here is to see how far south that super cooled dark red air gets into the southern United States. This is what's happening now. This is a recording. And it will be bigger 80 years from now, 60 years from now. Got it? Yeah. All right. Gentlemen?
Are we looking at Saturn?
This is a polar vortex. This is a thermograph. Dark red is colder. So you're looking for how far south that cold air burps.
I remember those. Those are fun.
It should be all up here nice and tight, but as the jet stream weakens with climate change, it spills this stuff out, and this hot air gets forced up there.
When was the last time we had a bad, was it like 2018? Last time we had a polar vortex?
Polar vortex? No, last year. This year?
This year?
Yeah,
This year. In Texas.
Oh, we got
Last year we had the one where it was at least up north, it was like with the wind chills on -30.
Yeah.
That's what I remember that.
Yeah, so these are infrequent, super intense, and we're not prepared for it. Our infrastructure doesn't work with this. But this is historic. This is old and recorded. And we're gonna get more of them more often, more intense later. So.
Yeah, your last lecture was a real buzzkill. Sorry. A real buzz.
Mission accomplished. Alright. So this is a polar vortex. Deep red is cold on this, so it's reverse color coded. We're looking for how far south that dark red splotch kind of spills across the continental United States on the east half of the thermograph.
Is this through years?
This is a single event. This is like a week or two. So with the weakening of the jet stream with climate change, we'd expect more of these, more often, more intense, as that sort of band or fence around this cold air mass is less able to contain the stuff from spilling out. And that's as air that's up to 70 degrees above ambient gets forced up by climate change. It forces this cold air out. Okay. All right. Polar vortex, check it out. So here's North America.
Right.
And you're looking for where that super cold polar air splashes southward and how far it gets. So we're looking at like northern Mexico, central Florida. Yeah, places that shouldn't be getting that kind of weather regularly. Okay. All right, how's it going? Does anybody have any questions to kind of contextualize any of this info to your park? In your mind's eye, can you see a typical recreationist having to cope with weather patterns like polar vortices or intensified drought followed by intensified storms followed by intensified drought? It's like more in extremes than in that easy middle ground, sort of Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold, not too rainy, not too dry. Garden climate is a term that's used by scientists. A garden climate that we used to have. Any questions? All right, so let's take a minute, and I got a million more things that I could show you if you would like, but it is kind of a buzzkill and depressing, so the data's all there. It checks out, unfortunately. But let's pivot to your particular contexts. We'll just kind of go around our outdoor office here. We'll start with you guys. So remind us what your park is and how you think the experience for maybe your most typical visitor might shift as a function of climate change or the climate emergency.
Our park's Olympic National Park, and a lot of it has to do with like the mountains and the glaciers disappearing.
Okay.
And that's like kind of a big pull for visitors is like the water resources and the mountains. And with the warming temperatures and stuff, a lot of the glaciers are going to disappear, which is going to affect like the rivers and the water resources. So if you're expecting to go on a hike and see like a waterfall or something, and it's not there, then that might cause visitors to like not move those off. That's really
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so in your mind's eye, picture this beautiful, beautiful, snow-covered, glacier-covered, cryospheric at the top mountain range. And you get a little bit of annual precipitation, and it freezes and stays right there, and then slowly over the course of the warmer months, that snowpack, as it's called, melts and feeds streams, which feed rivers, which feed standing water bodies and hydropower nearby, and then eventually goes out to the ocean and provides a whole bunch of recreationists and local communities fresh, clean drinking water. Now imagine you crank up the heat a little bit, and that steady contribution gets increased for a while, and then it runs out. So overall water loading into the fluvial or the channelized water flowing system goes up, and then it goes way down, and then from there the hydrograph over time looks like a bunch of flat valleys and very sharp spikes, individual storm events followed by intensified drought. Okay, so these guys and gals have identified something that India and Pakistan and Nepal and other countries along like the Mongolian Himalaya range, where Mount Everest is and stuff like that. It's the same thing, but it's the drinking water and the agriculture water for over 1 billion people. So there's kind of too much water right now because it's melting like crazy. And then that stock, that reservoir, that reserve is gone. That frozen aquifer is gone, or drastically reduced to the point of not being a functional, garden-like, recognizable annual hydrograph. Okay? So, that means in the near term we need to make sure our people know a heck of a lot more about how to cross flowing water, rapidly flowing water that's cold and interferes with muscle articulation. If you've ever waded across a glacial melt stream, it's cold, it's ice water, like literally ice water. And your muscles don't work quite as well. It's harder to keep your balance when you can't feel your feet on shifting river rocks as you're getting across tumbling whitewater, okay? So that's a thing. In the longer term, you need to help folks think about, okay, so what are the signs of a flash flood? Because instead of that steady contribution of glacial meltwater, snowpack meltwater, like pretty much all of California and the West depends on having, we just get the contributions to the same fluvial channels from individual storm events, which peak and push these huge walls of debris and tumbling water and wash people down and kill people. And then until you get another storm like that, there's nothing. The river starts to run lower or even in some cases run dry. Okay, cool. So any place that has a snowpack is looking at this kind of a thing. All right, let's see. Next up is U.S. Virgin Islands. Yeah? All right, so what's a typical visitor's experience? How's that going to change at U.S. Virgin Islands?
Well, they're adding some like travel bans or like kind of thinking about it for like Zika virus and like all these little tropical viruses that are coming with like the climate change, bringing in like new bugs and stuff like that. And then they're also seeing like a reduction of their shoreline because like water levels rising, so it'll be like harder for like visitors coming to like see the beach and stuff and there's space for them. So there'll be less people being able to be on the beach.
All right, so we talked just a little bit about carrying capacity in this class earlier, right? So we got social, ecological carrying capacity. We got managerial carrying capacity, things we can do to modify the environment to help it carry more people or the same number of people more sustainably or whatever. We've also got that physical carrying capacity. If there's just fewer square meters of beach because the oceans are rising at a measurable rate every year right now, and that's accelerating, then that's an issue. And the sort of easy button there, I fixed it, let's truck in a bunch of sand and build a bunch of seawalls and stuff like that, like they do in Miami, for example, to build up more beach until it gets washed out by the next storm. It's amazing. They'll do it over and over and over. It's unbelievable. Anyway, that's not really a suitable option for a more natural place. Running a bunch of basically highway construction equipment to haul in lots of sand or suck up sand from the ocean floor with dredging barges and blast it onto the beach. Super short-term solution, not at all sustainable, very fossil fuel intensive, and is in no way natural. So we can't build our way out of shoreline loss. Okay? Cool. Next, Roosevelt, right? All right, so what's going on at Roosevelt? Where is that for folks who aren't familiar with it, since you guys just changed to it?
It's like in western North Dakota.
Western North Dakota. All right, it's a pretty cold place for now.
They right now have like a fire restriction in the area, so with like the warmer climate, like that fire season kind of
Okay, so it's parts of it kind of look like rolling prairie, right? And parts of it are more forested. Yeah. So we normally expect fire-adapted ecosystems like prairies to have fire, but, well, we're not doing so great in helping people live sustainably with fire in places like California. And now those problem areas are rapidly expanding eastward and northward. In a previous class session, we talked about how each year we are now deploying thousands of wildland firefighters through the U.S. Forest Service up to Alaska and fighting fires up there. And northern western Dakotas are certainly not that far north and getting ready to get more fire prone. Okay, cool. So this is pretty difficult and scary. So if you have visitors in your backcountry and your park staff have a finite amount of resources to fight fires, but also contact visitors who need to know this information and get the heck out of Dodge, right? You have to track them all down and understand where they're at. So one change from wildfires becoming more intense, more common in some places, depending on the local ecosystem and changing through time, is potentially having more of like a draconian permit system. Instead of just like getting a permit and go wandering for a couple of weeks out in the backcountry or wilderness, or just going camping and fishing and hunting and stuff like that for a while. Well, now the Park Service really needs to know specifically where you're at so they can get you out of there a lot faster, and they can keep, and you can keep, as part of these exercises, yourself, your staff, who are tasked with getting visitors safely out of a wildfire encroachment area, keeping you alive, right? So this is not just a bigger risk for them, it is for you as well. Your day-to-day job is keeping these people alive. All right, let's see, Isle Royal I think is next. So what's going on with visitors up there in 2080?
be a lot worse for the visitors. Right now they're fighting with algae blooms.
Okay.
Every single water source inland. In more intense summers like that, we're start losing a lot more wildlife. Visitors won't be able to, they'll have to backpack in all the water.
Okay.
It was ready, but it'll be a lot worse. And the winter's be a lot worse. Our modes of transportation to Isle Royale are going to change, and how people traverse the land.
All right. So, for the recording, and in case you can hear it over the motor noise nearby, Jack's talking about toxic algal blooms in a beautiful backcountry place. This is a problem of over-fertilization and thermal poisoning of an area. And areas that have toxic algal blooms, cyanobacteria aren't always what many of the members of your recreating public, your visitors, thinking of. So we're aware of the term red tide and a very specific kind of toxic algal bloom along the coast of Florida, for example. Well, folks aren't expecting that up in small water sources on the north side of Lake Superior, way at the far end of the continental United States. So this becomes an information issue, it's a safety issue, it's a training and skills issue. And just like at the Roosevelt, you might have to have people demonstrating more skill or filling out much more detailed permits and having a sensation of, man, the federal government knows exactly where I am, but it's for my safety. But the federal government knows exactly where I am out in the backcountry for my safety, right? So this kind of erodes our abilities to provide perceived freedoms to our visitors, right? It makes our job harder, makes us potentially come across a little bit less friendly when we're trying to do good things. We're trying to keep people safe and let them have a lot of freedom. Okay? This is tough. This is tough. All right, who's next? C&O Canal National Historic Park? All right, what's going on with climate change around the DC area and points north and west?
Our canal is like already close to overflowing at some so they might build bigger.
Wait, we got to build bigger walls? Our government's super excited about building walls. This is the part we were born to play, baby, to quote The Simpsons. What's the problem with building higher walls on an archaeological site? So archaeological restoration of some of those locks and dams is this super slow, expensive, and unfortunately, with an increased flooding regime on the Potomac River, a temporary, expensive, slow effort. Dang. And not through any fault of the Park Service, right? They're trying to restore this beautiful and amazing historic facility that has a lot to do with the first couple of decades of our country's history. And increased, intensified floods on the Potomac are gonna start hammering at it, and it's not gonna stop. It just gets worse and worse and worse, and every once in a while you have full-size, mature, 250-year-old trees being used as battering rams, one after the other, uprooted by a flood and then thrown at anything in the path, even 80 feet up from the nominal river channel, because it's super channelized and peak floods real hard on that section of the Potomac. So this is tough, for sure. That's a good identification. Are you C&O Canal as well, or? Zion. All right, what's going on at Zion with climate change? Tell me good news, because I really like Zion.
As it heats up, some like the underwater wells, springs will start to lessen and dry up. So the narrows could potentially not run, and the less water the drier will be. And it's already a really dry, arid climate, so it's only going to get worse. And with warmer winters, it won't kill off some of the mosquito, like tarantula, spider population, and so they will boom because of that. And it'll just be a lot buggier, uncomfortable.
Hotter, drier, and buggier. That's the recipe for a good trip.
Yep.
At Zion. Okay. All right, so Zion is one of those parks where heat exhaustion, emergency extraction of people for urgent medical care is a thing, especially during the peak season months. The canyon walls just reflect and magnify sunlight like crazy. So unless you're up in the high country there, it can be pretty uncomfortable. And what this means for not just folks at Zion, but for all of us, is that the average temperature is going up, and the peaks and valleys around that central tendency, around that average, get amplified as well. And you can literally see this on graphs over time of maximum and minimum temperature plotted around the line through the middle. That's the average for that area at that time. So let me pull up one of those and show you what that looks like, and then talk through kind of how to apply it. So this is a count of days above a dangerous heat threshold. Let's see. Okay, so this is a time graph running from about 1960 to about the year 2100. So bracketing our lifetimes with a couple of decades padded on either side so we can see the bigger trend, all right? So 1950, 1960, out to about the year 2100. Let's zoom in a little bit here, it'll be easier to see. This is a graph of the count of days at or above 90 degrees Fahrenheit for Cincinnati, Ohio, in the past as recorded, and then in the future as modeled. And you'll see the model doesn't make any wild leaps saying things are going to be nuts. It just kind of continues the trend forward from what we have already observed and recorded, things that are factually kind of indisputable. All right, so the vertical axis on this is the number of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, with the assumption that these are going to be summer days, and here in southern Illinois, Cincinnati, which is also in the Ohio River Basin, it's going to be pretty humid as well. Here in the Midwest, we're going to see more precip more often, up in the double digits range. So 90 plus degrees, specifically 95 degrees, and if we have 100% humidity on those days as well, that's the immediately fatal within a few hours of exposure kind of range. All right, so here's what this looks like. I'll kind of slow walk it around so everybody can take a moment to kind of parse it. All right, so in 2060, I'm going to be 80 years old. And the number of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit and humid, for me, if I'm living in Cincinnati, as a proxy for Carbondale, we're about the same latitude. There are a lot more days. So the early dot down close to the bottom axis of the graph is where we're at right now. We get about 10 days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit currently at this latitude on a good summer. As you can see, that count grows rapidly as we go from that first dot towards the second dot. So we'll have between 4 and 10 times as many days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit according to our current climate trajectory. So for your park, if part of your day-to-day safety operations for visitors, making contacts on hot days and so forth, involves heat exhaustion, heat stroke, exposure at the high end of the temperature range, like at Zion, like in Cincinnati, Ohio. This doesn't have to be a hot, exotic locations kind of thing. This is like us. This is our home. Imagine having to quadruple or up to 10 times as many visitor rescue operations to get folks out of literally lethal weather conditions. Okay? This is in the middle of the Midwest, not way off in Dubai or someplace like that. They got it even worse than we do, although it's a dry heat over there. There are some days already where places like Dubai and Qatar and Oman and stuff like that, they hit 140 degrees. That's the warm setting on your oven. That is not survivable without special equipment. And they're doing that like now. So that's exciting. All right. So the application for us is your park a place that gets hot? For the budget for the year 2060, in this case, we'd want to do the rescue operations line item, find that, and then multiply it by anywhere between a factor of 4 and 10. And search and rescue operations, super expensive and disruptive, because when there's, a serious issue of health or safety or survival in the backcountry, a lot of people who aren't doing search and rescue stuff full time, it's just a collateral duty of their jobs. You got to drop everything else and race into that and focus wholly on that. Okay? In the same way that if you are fire certified, sometimes you just got to drop all the other stuff you're getting paid to do to go fight the fire on your park's property or an adjacent forest property if you're running an interagency fire dispatch, something like that. Very common. And so forth. Okay? So, next question is, for your park, is exposure on the hot end of things going to be an issue? Heat stroke, heat emergencies, people collapsing. It's very normal right now, every single day, to see backcountry paramedics running down the trails at the Grand Canyon with 80-pound basically rescue and extraction first aid kits each. Imagine what that's doing to their knees, doing this every single day to get to people who run out of water down there, despite the numerous signs and cautionary measures and stringent permit requirements to go on a multi-day hike down into the Grand Canyon. A lot of day hikers they don't realize what it's like. So instead of all beautiful signs, telling you about the geologic history and the Native American First Nations cultural history around the area, a lot of them are big red, black, white, stark danger signs saying, hey, this is where people die, this is how they die, and it could happen to you too. It happens to fit, active duty military folks just on a trip here. It happens to marathon runners. People die here all the time from running out of water and overheating. And even with all those signs, they're sending in rescue personnel pretty much every day during the peak season at the Grand Canyon. So our next question is your park like this? Are you looking at that side of things? And maybe it's no. Maybe it's not going to be killer hot at Isle Royal in June. It might, get up to a nice scorching 75 and sunny on a good day up there. Okay, so take a few minutes, and we won't spend as much time on this one, but is heat emergency, like dangerous or lethal exposure conditions, going to be a thing at your park based on its latitude, based on the climate forecast or the modeling for your park that we did last week? Cool. So, just, we don't have to go back through in a structured way, but in general, is heat emergency, heat exposure, a major issue in your park for your visitors, based on things generally heating up and the swings getting more drastic? So higher peaks, lower troughs, with polar vortexes and stuff like that. Heat exposure, an issue? Say no, Canal? Yes, good answer. How about an Isle Royal? No, not really. Good answer. How about Roosevelt? Yeah, surprisingly. You don't think of North and South Dakota as being ridiculously hot, but yeah, it's moving that direction. All right, especially with how much it's going to heat up from where it is now. How about U.S. Virgin Islands? Odd dip, as they say in The Good Place. It's already tropical, and it gets hotter from there. All right, how about you guys? Yes. Okay. Now, the Olympics, which is, I think of it as a cool, rainy place, but dang, might get some heat waves. All right. How about you? Definitely hotter at Zion. Okay. Okay, great. So that's mostly a problem for most of us. Because climate it touches all of us, there's no escaping this in our breathing tank here. I want to read you the abstract of a study that came out, just the abstract, so just the functional summary of it is less than a page long. It's like 5 or 6 paragraphs total, not too bad. Came out in June of this year from the Global Oceanic Environmental Survey, so planet-wide inventory of how are our oceans doing as a function of climate change right now and into like the near future. This is not year 2500, when we've got nuclear fusion and 3D printing everything. All right, here we go. Planktonic plants and animals at the base of the marine food chain make all life on Earth possible. Without them, the atmosphere would be fatally toxic from carbon dioxide. We would have no oxygen. There would be no whales, birds, or fish in the oceans. Over the last 70 years, we've already lost more than 50% of all marine life from the world's oceans, and it is continuing to decline at a rate of 1% per year. So doing the math, 50 years from now, real bad day. Atmospheric carbon dioxide causes ocean acidification, and a loss of marine plants and animals accelerates the process. A small increase in acidity caused by carbon dioxide, which turns into carbonic acid, again, that same weak organic acid that etches your teeth when you drink Coca-Cola and other sugar slurry chemical products. Atmospheric carbon dioxide causes ocean acidification, and a loss of marine plants and animals accelerates the process. A small increase in acidity caused by carbon dioxide dissolves magnesium calcite and aragonite, forms of calcium carbonate, upon which 50% of all marine life, including plankton and coral reef, are composed. Over the next 25 years, the pH will continue to drop across the global ocean from pH 8.04 to pH 7.95. So this is getting a little bit more technical and numeric. I'll repeat that. pH 8.04 currently to pH 7.95 over the next 25 years. And an estimated 80 to 90% of all marine life will be lost from the oceans as a direct result. Even if the world achieves net zero by 2045, 5 years sooner than the Paris Climate Accords, atmospheric carbon dioxide will still exceed 500 parts per million, and the oceans will still drop to pH 7.95, at which an estimated 80 to 90% of all marine life is gone. Based on current climate change policy of carbon mitigation, so driving our internal combustion engine cars and planting trees to suck out all that carbon, or some of it, We will not be able to stop the loss of most marine life, which includes fish and the food supply, direct food supply, for 3 billion people, almost half of our current world population right now. In addition, we lose the life support system for the entire planet. This decline has gone largely unnoticed because most of the plants and animals in the ocean are under 1 millimeter in size, and they're not closely monitored over time. By way of an example, Prochlorococcus, a cyanobacteria responsible for making 20% of our oxygen, one species makes 1 in 5 breaths of oxygen for us humans, was only even discovered in 1985. Ocean acidification and climate change cannot adequately describe the loss of marine life. 30% of the ocean have high nutrient concentrations, but 0 or low plant growth. If it is not the lack of nutrients or trace nutrients responsible for the loss of marine life, this leaves aquatic environmental pollution as the last plausible explanation. The impact of chemical and microplastic pollution on planktonic marine life has been almost completely ignored by the scientific community, and as such, industry and governments have not been alerted to the impending threats to the ocean. Full stop. So that's what we are cruising towards day by day. And 1% per year loss of ocean species in the near term, and 80 to 90% loss in the next 25 years. That's not even all the way through your career, right? This is near-term stuff. And this is the roller coaster we're strapped into at the moment. So, in light of this, what is your group's inference? What is your group's conclusion about how to best protect the functional ecosystem and recreation opportunities that you are working to provide at the very highest level, very highest quality level? In light of this information, how do you accomplish that? What do you need to accomplish beforehand in order to accomplish the protection and the provision to your visitors of your park? Discuss within your group.
make an ad campaign. Knowing your carbon emissions.
How's everybody doing? Have you had a chance pretty well? Talk with the crew, unless you're the only one there, about what larger issues to tackle so that you have the space and capacity to manage a park. Any questions? All right, what kinds of ideas did you guys and gals come up with? What do the priorities become in the face of that ocean acidification process as one more part of the globally coupled, we're linked together climate system?
Some of what we're talking was like educating guests, educating in general, getting the knowledge out there, how to prevent it, how to combat it.
Okay. Education. So how can we expect people to help out or change trajectory unless they even know that that's a thing? Okay, right on. That answer is always going to go over well on a university campus, right? I mean, we're thoroughly biased towards education. You know, it's better than pooling ignorance. I hope. Maybe. What else? Other than education inside of our parks so that we can kind of help everything outside of our parks too.
You said that closed down certain trails, like Billy Goat Trail has no shade, so if it's a really hot day, you're not allowed to.
Okay. So kind of seasonal or condition-based closures? Yeah, that's a thing right now. That's right on target. Cool. What else?
One thing we had talked about was limiting like cruise ships, because since our area gets a lot of that, it's not just like the noise pollution, but also the waste that they let out. Probably just like limiting where they go around our park.
Cool. Working with some of these companies to really transform their entire business model. So each of those major cruise ships is, you know, pumping out 3 to 5 million cars worth of emissions. And each of those cubic meters or gallons or liters of carbon dioxide and diesel combustion products, that's hanging out in the atmosphere for the next 80 to 120 years, having its effect. So somebody's embodied carbon in their steak dinner aboard the ship, and all the transportation carbon to get them to that ship and then to move the ship around and so forth, that's a delicious steak for like an hour. And then for the next century, all of us are bearing the burden of the carbon load of that steak and the transportation and the construction of the ship and the airports and so forth to get people back and forth to have a steak on the water next to U.S. Virgin Islands. So yeah, working with partnering companies to meaningfully transform away from 3 to 5 million cars worth of emissions just out of the smokestacks of one ship at a time. And there are lots and lots of cruise ships and shipping ships out there. And working with our agriculture system, so the majority of grains that we produce in the United States with our fossil fuel synthesized fertilizers, the majority of that doesn't feed us. It feeds animals that we eat. Transforming our food system to get away from its absolute complete addiction on oil and related petroleum products, but oil is a nice proxy. Cool, what else? Otherwise, we're already on track for losing 80 to 90% of stuff in the ocean, and maybe total collapse not long after that. So, weird. We gotta get the word out. What are other ideas? How else do you work with people outside of your park so that you can have a chance at keeping the inside of your park functional? Keeping the earth system recognizable and functional so that we have oxygen to get to our parks and enjoy them. And not too much carbon dioxide, acidifying our oceans and killing off all those reefs that we are working so hard to protect. Other ideas? Okay, we'll end with a study that was not, unfortunately, it was not done by SIU. It was done by a bunch of MIT folks back in the day, and it modeled the whole Earth system and tracked not only like pollution and resource extraction and use and stuff like that, but hooked that together with human population and services like, healthcare and education, like you guys were talking about, would be listed as a service. And they ran through a bunch of scenarios on, okay, so if we aim in our current sort of developing Western, fossil fuel friendly, build lots of things, have a high standard of living, higher than anything in previous history, higher than anywhere else around the world. What happens if we track how much mineral phosphorus we use? There's a finite amount at the surface of the earth that we put into our fertilizer, and then we grow our foods so we can have our avocado toast and our pumpkin spice lattes and stuff like that, based on that chemical fertilizer. What happens if we, use those things and we multiply our use by growth or drops in our population and stuff like that? Almost every scenario that they kind of fed into that simulation this was in the 1970s, back when they were first using computers for computer modeling and stuff like that. So they tracked the total available mineral assets of the planet and population and services and all that stuff, and then ran different scenarios like what happens if we keep going like we are, kind of a business as usual approach. What happens if we aggressively go after like high technology solutions to things like replacing internal combustion engines with fusion powered cars or something like that burn clean or whatever, and so forth. How does that affect our population as humans and kind of the services that our planet will support? Pretty much every scenario that they tried, including straight up doubling the amount of resources available, just saying like if we magically found a second planet Earth and mined the bejesus out of that one too and brought it all back here and supported our society, almost all those scenarios ended in a collapse between like a total global collapse with population cresting at 10 or 11 billion people and then dropping to about 500 million people worldwide as the maximum that the Earth could even support between 2035 and around 2070 or so. And that kind of freaked some people out. And there was a lot of good, meaningful, vigorous discussion in the 70s, 80s, and 90s because those are some pretty dire predictions in those computer models. They were able to find a scenario or a solution where population continues to increase to right about now and then is like hard steered back down to a more sustainable level. And in that case, human civilization did not collapse. Like the model showed it was possible, but the easiest and most likely options lead to, general collapse around the world, again, between 2035 and around 2070. So there's a lot of good discussion. A lot of subsequent models were made, and since then, folks have, in the 20-aughts and the 2010s, gone back to that MIT model and said, okay, so, every model is wrong as an approximation of reality. Some models are close enough to right to be useful. So let's go back and punch in some updated numbers for some of these scenarios and just kind of see how these like extrapolated in 1970 or so trajectories actually look. And as it turns out, we're like spot on with the business as usual scenario. So if I can pull up the graphs for you here. That's just another way to kind of illustrate this sense of, what's our arc? What's our trajectory outside of the boundaries of your park, planet-wide, so that we kind of have a better sense of how to target stuff inside your park for management. Let's see here. There we go. All right, so this was called the Limits to Growth Study back in the day. And here's a 2006 where folks took all the information that the original modelers had in like 1970, 1972, and then added the next 30 to 40 years worth of data and said, we won't change anything about these like models, we'll just add in additional data and see how the models did. So the reference scenario looks like this. This is a whole bunch of line graphs superimposed on top of each other. As I walk it around, I'll kind of explain what you're looking at here. All right, so this goes from the year 1900 to the year 2100, the last century into the end of our current century. All right, this is the reference scenario. This is kind of if we continue on, we keep on keeping on, building housing, making some improvements in agricultural output and stuff like that. What happens as we start to exhaust some irreplaceable resources like our topsoil and its fertility, and things like, petroleum that our fertilizers and transport and our way of life are based on? So Pay attention to the green line and the red line. The x-axis is time, kind of centered around the year 2000, a little bit ago. So the reference scenario, the business as usual scenario, suggested that around 2035, human population and industrial output peak, following centuries of increases. So the red line and the green line. Around 2035, peak and then rapidly drop down from 8 to 10 billion population of humans down towards about a 500 million of a post-industrial planetary human carrying capacity. So the red line and the green line, about 2035. Got it? This is the original 1970s kind of prediction. We use modeling to predict things in complex situations like this. Pay attention to the red line and the green line. If you find the peaks on both of those, they're about the same. And around the year 2035, the growth stops, decelerates enough that those values actually go negative. So we start losing population as we're less able to grow crops in depleted soil, less able to drive people to work as we start tapping out oil wells, stuff like that. So the red peak and the green peak around 2035. Got it? Okay. So in 2006 and I think like 2014, something like that, researchers went back and plugged in updated numbers like since early 1970s. And then superimposed the actual data, how things are actually going, versus what the models predicted. And so we get there's a 2010 update. No, 2014, sorry. Here we are, all right. So this graph is gonna combine two things. It's gonna show that original model and it'll superimpose in bold with the same color what our actual lived existence over the past 40 to 45 years has been. So the specific numbers matter less than the left to right position of the peaks where you see them. Okay. If we see any of those upward trending lines from the past decades leveling off or dropping, that's like we're already into pretty intensive collapse. Okay, so just pay attention to the middle of the three graphs on this page. It's kind of zoomed in on that one, but it's a lot to kind of parse and look at. All right. So the bold, the fat lines are real world data superimposed on that model run that you just looked at before. So just kind of qualitatively, or in my own words, we'll describe it as the services per capita prediction looks like it wasn't quite optimistic enough. We underestimated the services per capita, the healthcare, the education, the human rights, all of the things that we take advantage of as people in modern society, we enjoy, the model was a little bit too pessimistic about that. That has grown sharply. It's that real dark, upward trending line. The food per capita, the green line, is pretty close. Pretty close to the forecast, but it's a little bit higher than the forecast. Ag researchers have done amazing stuff with genomics to make more food output possible. The industrial output was a little bit too optimistic. The model overestimated our global industrial output a little bit, which is saying something, because China, for example, spins up a couple, 2 to 3 new coal-fired power plants every week. They have cities that they're trying to power of 50 to 75 million people. That's 3 greater New Yorks in one. That's like 2 to 3 Tokyos in one. So, the 40-year update to the Limits to Growth study from the 1970s, as updated around 2014, suggests that we are tracking pretty well with that original model, which unfortunately forecasted major interrelated collapses between 2035 and 2070. So, sometimes for the management of your park, we gotta make sure all of our fundamental assumptions of things like tomorrow being like today, we gotta test those assumptions and see if that's actually true. And these models are kind of how we do that in any meaningful way, because these are super complex systems. This is big. It's hard to forecast anything 40 years out in advance with any kind of accuracy, and the fact they did was pretty incredible. And there have since been additional updates to this that are published kind of every year or two. It's pretty cool stuff to watch it unfold. It's also terrifying. If those predictions are true, yikes. 2035 is not that far off. And dropping from 8 or 9 billion people down to a half billion in like a generation, I bet that's going to be a rough ride if that's what ends up happening. So, all this to say that, we want to check our assumptions at the door and use data-driven approaches to calibrate our assumptions with reality. In this class, for our scenarios, and in life more broadly. Sounds good? Okay. I'm simplifying a lot of stuff. Like, there's a lot of nuance and texture and so on and so forth with this. So is this confusing? Is anybody not real sure what this is trying to get across? The big picture takeaways from a lot of studies like this are, yes, things could be really bad, like on the order of the collapse of Western civilization bad, because all societies eventually collapse. Every single one previously has, right? We're not magically insulated from that. The other big takeaway from this is that we have the chance, we have the tools, we have the understanding to get off of this track and get onto that kind of sustainable, long-term, everybody doesn't have to starve to death or die in the climate wars kind of an approach. But it does change a lot of things. We have to change a lot of those assumptions in terms of, well, I'm going to go live in low-density suburban housing and get in my car or single-occupant truck and burn a lot of dead plants to get to work and back. And I'm going to get my food from, like, chickens grown in CAFOs out west and then shipped as birds to China for processing, shipped to South America for finishing, and then shipped back up to the United States so we can get it on our grocery store shelf and spend thousands of food miles worth of carbon for every meal that we have. Instead of like growing our own stuff, maybe some local stuff, maybe some carbon regenerative farming instead of our industrial farming. So that's kind of all I got for today. Let's take a couple of minutes to answer any questions you have, and then we'll dismiss, I think, hopefully a little bit early. Yeah? No? Not really. It's 3:50. Never mind. So I'll be around for questions. If you have them, I'm happy to help clarify. Otherwise, I will see you on Monday. Thank you.